down.
Yes.
All right. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. If you can make sure to sign in, sign-in sheet's going around. And today it's really a pleasure to introduce a doctoral candidate who, or just about right after your proposal defense.
Yeah, in April 14th, on April 5th, yeah.
Okay, so from our own department, who's working with Dr. Skinner, Ali Fallah, who's going to tell us about his doctoral research today, the impact of vegetation changes on climate extremes, and yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Ali, and I did my master here with Dr. Skinner. I continue for Ph.D. in our department. Very nice department, I like that so far. What I'm talking about is the impact of, like you heard a lot about this, like how is climate change, global warming with the greenhouse gas effect. But maybe you might not heard about the vegetation and how vegetation changes and how vegetation can impact climate. I just want to focus so how is the changes in vegetation with climate change, and then how it feedback. We have kind of feedback. Climate change, vegetation change, and again climate change. So, and I'm talking about this part. So it would be 3 chapters on my PhD thesis. I succeeded the first chapter, submitted the manuscript recently. Thank you. It's Journal of Geophysical Engineering, AGU Journal, Atmosphere. That was mostly focusing on the CO2 vegetation interactions. The second part is how the changes in phenology. It's like if you have, sometimes you have shoulder seasons here, you have a shift in start of the spring, so it's earlier spring. So what's going to happen if we have earlier spring and we have longer growing season for the vegetation, and how it can impact the climate extremes like drought, heat waves, wildfires, which is the last chapter, focus on the wildfires specifically. But today I just want to focus on the first 2 chapters, not the third one. Still need to work with that. This is what we have seen so far based on observation, satellite data. So how vegetation change. So for instance, this one is 1982-2009. It shows leaf area index, which is index to change like how big is the leaf area. It's bigger leaf area index means that we have greener and we have more vegetation activity. So it shows that the positive trend is happening 1982-2009 and also 2000-2018 also from Moody's, a very popular product like satellite data. Majority of locations shows vegetation greening. Some locations we have like browning, but yeah. And the reason is, part of that is radiative effect. You already know about that, greenhouse gas effect. So we have warming, and because of that, so vegetation can grow more. That's the most known we know about that. But this is what scientists don't know about it, and it's so much uncertainty about it. It's like about climate change, about future projections, and we need to know more about this. Is CO2 and vegetation can interact. What means that plants do photosynthesis, and they need CO2 concentrate, so they need CO2. So if the more CO2 we have in the atmosphere, so plants can grow more. We say CO2 fertilization effect. And also, when we have more CO2 in the atmosphere, at the same time, so plants don't have to open the stomata on the leaves much. So they preserve water and transpiration, and I'll explain more in the next slide. So it's kind of unknown and uncertain how is that response. But another thing is when phenology changes. So you can see here the Earth from pole. You've got the North Pole. Here the US, yeah, Greenland. And we have Europe and Asia. So we will see that the green color means that the growing season is lengthening. Like the start of SOS is the start of the spring, and EOS is end of season. That one is the start of season. If you look at the histogram here, we have, in just recent decades, like 1982 to 2011, we have more frequent like days starting like with warming, like with vegetation greening and leaf out. We have more toward like we have advanced, so we have earlier vegetation greening. You can see here also, and also at the end, at fall also is going toward like winter, so it's delay in vegetation browning. So it means that we will have longer growing seasons with that. So this is what we saw from satellite data. Yep. But besides satellite data, we have some people did a great job with FACES experiment. It's free air CO2 injection experiment. And with this experiment, what they did, they had two kind of control experiment. So one part is vegetation with the ambient CO2. So what's the atmosphere outside? We have CO2 concentration, that amount. But the other vegetation here, it was elevated CO2. So it's like more carbon dioxide available for those plants to see how is that. So this is the control simulation. So the control experiment, and this is the like higher CO2. So this is lower, this is higher. So what happened with this experiment, they realized something like that. So yeah, we know plants do photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is absorbing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and then they plants release water and CO2 from the stomata. This is photosynthesis. When we say transpiration process, this is like kind of evaporation that our body do also is evaporation. This is the plant also do transpiration or evaporation. But according to the FACE experiment, we saw last slide, vegetation have contrasting behavior in response to elevated CO2. One side, they can do a CO2 fertilization effect, which means that higher CO2 increase the photosynthesis, and then that means that it would increase the transpiration, so they would transfer more water in the atmosphere, and they grow more and more. But on the contrary is like CO2 physiological effects, which is with higher CO2, plant don't have to open those stomata so much because the CO2 concentration is enough in the atmosphere. You don't have to open it up. And then what's happening is can decrease transpiration. So what's going to happen at the end, it's so important because of droughts, because of wildfire and heat wave. But this depends on which one wins out. What would happen with that? What's going to happen for the Earth if we have warmer Earth and increase the CO2 atmosphere? So only because of this war, not CO2 interactions but anyway, we use the climate models to answer these questions beside the experiments. So this is what we can see here, changes in structure and physiology of vegetation. If we have one ideal scenario, I use the climate model, CESM. We can see here how changes in leaf area index, the vegetation greening, and how the changes in transpiration from the plant. If we have the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is like quadrupled. So if you have 4 times more amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, what's going to happen for vegetation, for leaf area index, and for transpiration. So you see that majority of locations we have higher vegetation activity, but as you see here, this is the interesting part is transpiration is decreases, and the reason is the physiological effect wins out. It means that that's true, plants have a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Some locations, they increase transpiration because of that. But a lot of locations, because CO2 concentration is high, they don't have to open the stomata. And because of that, they would reduce transpiration. And because of that, the soil moisture would be preserved. But yeah, we use also climate models to understand the phenology changes. So this is one of the climate models, I think it's a French one. There's like so many climate models, but this is one of them. And what they did this experiment, they look at, so how is the changes in recent decades with vegetation greening? So if we have earlier spring and leaf out, imagine now it's we have still no leaves on the trees, but if we have something like that, imagine that's scenario, something like that. With this, that is happening slowly, and we can see here. So the vegetation is getting more and more. So we have higher vegetation, leaf area index in spring here, as we can see. With that, we would have more evapotranspiration because, yeah, we have warming, vegetation are high, and evapotranspiration is during the spring is like the solid one, and summer the gaseous one. And because of that, we have higher precipitation, so plant can change the precipitation. That's the fun fact. And then, but because the amount of evapotranspiration is higher than the amount of precipitation, so this is like evaporation is going up, precipitation is coming down. So eventually, what we have for soil water content is lower. So it means that there would be more evaporation than transpiration. So during summer, during spring and summer both, we would have less soil moisture available. That's the consequence for drought and heat waves. So that's the other country. It's more complicated. A lot of things change. With vegetation changes, we would have changes in energy balance. So we may heard about latent heat or sensible heat. So when you have more vegetation, so we would have more transpiration. So we would like increase in evapotranspiration, and then it goes more maybe clouds in the atmosphere. With more clouds, can have more precipitation in that location, or even in remote places can change the precipitation as well. So what's unexplained is what we are looking, what's the research gap is, yeah, what's this future vegetation changes, the impacts on climate extremes. And with that, if we know this, we will be more prepared for the climate extremes happening. So this is the statement. This is a statement is what's the influence of raising carbon dioxide in the atmosphere on vegetation, which is both the direct effect and indirect effect. The direct effect was global, the direct was the global warming and greenhouse gas effect, so it's like more vegetation activities. And the indirect effect is CO2 vegetation interaction. So what's the impact of elevated CO2 on vegetation changes, and how it can impact the climate extremes? So yeah, the first chapter, I will focus on the vegetation changes, with CO2 and then how it can impact soil moisture, and then how this can propagate into like flash drought even, which is kind of type of drought, rapid onset drought. So I will focus on that part. The second chapter, I will focus more on the changing plant phenology, the spring, earlier spring or late fall. So we have longer growing season, what's going to happen for temperature, precipitation, soil moisture, and also heat waves and droughts. So yeah, that's chapter 1. You can see here CO2 fertilization effect and CO2 physiological effect, which kind of wins out. That's we are looking for. So yeah, I will focus only for chapter 1 on flash drought event, which is type of drought with rapid onset and intensification. It causes so much cost for agricultural sector. It happened so many in the U.S. and across the world, so even nearby also. Even I think after that also we had in 2023 also. This is just one example. Temperature, we have temperature anomalies, like temperature higher during that time. Precipitation is lower during that time. Like even during the spring was good amount of precipitation, but what happened during summer is like all of a sudden, like a couple of weeks, it's developed. Low precipitation means dry conditions, and we have also high temperatures, means that hot conditions. So dry and hot conditions at the same time, and that's what's happening. What's the impact? It's not only for crop damage, $30 billion damage, agricultural loss in 2012. We had a lot of that before and after also. But this one is notorious because it was flash drought. It was rapid onset, and then flash drought transitioned to drought. And it took a long time, so much agricultural loss, and too much wildfires, problem for navigation, and for animals, for human health also. So that's the way that we can take a shot. Guys, we look at soil moisture data. Soil moisture, we have data, not much actually. Like we can use satellite data for topsoil soil moisture. But here we use simulations, so that's thanks to these models, we can look at that, the output of models. So for instance, this is 2012, just one location I selected in Arkansas, and just bring it here, so you can see the soil moisture. So we have, April, October maybe, So that's the growing season. And you can see the soil moisture amount for 2012, the blue line. Those green and orange lines are climatological data versus this one, and see that how soil moisture declines all of a sudden in a couple of weeks. And then because of that, it transitions also to drought also. It's not recovering fast. And then it's ended when it's end of growing season, so that's the end of that. This is just one example how we have onset and termination of flash drought. So yeah, we work with this algorithm, coding with Python, to use those, analyze them. But the research question is, so as I mentioned for chapter 1 is 2. One is how's the impact of future climate warming for the future of drought, versus how important is the future vegetation change for flash drought. So that was greenhouse gas effect. The other was CO2 vegetation interaction. So we're gonna see like how is the relative roles of them. That's the hypothesis. Always do for scientific stuff. The hypothesis is we have CO2 fertilization effect and physiological effect. Those two effects are kind of opposite performance. And then it depends what's going to happen for flashed out. It depends on which of these effects wins out and is dominant. So that's the hypothesis. And then for that, to test the hypothesis, we use the climate models. One of the climate models is the Community Earth System model. It's from NCAR, National Center for Atmospheric Research, and located in Colorado, Boulder. I got the internship, summer internship, and I would be able to visit there for summer for 3 months and doing research science there. With these climate models, we can look at the past, current, and future of EM climate. So billions of codes written in Fortran. I don't know Fortran, and we don't have to know Fortran to run these climate models because it's just small changes, the input data. Like if you have like carbon dioxide, I'm gonna quadruple that. I can do it doing some idealized scenario. I don't have to know Fortran. I just need to know a little bit Bash, like Linux coding, little, and Python, of course, to look at the output of this model, like doing post processing. So that's the experiment that we did. So it's kind of, I mean, I got this. I just analyzed it. I haven't run this simulation myself, but the other chapter I do. This is the experiment that we had to isolate the effect of vegetation versus radiative effect. So this is there are like 4 experiments. PI is pre-industrial level. If you have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and vegetation. So the same is 280 pre-industrial. Versus if we have like higher vegetation experiences higher CO2 4 times, or atmosphere on the atmosphere field and experience higher CO2 or both. So this way we can do some idealized scenario to look at that. And that's the output that we can see here only if we have greenhouse gas. CO2 and vegetation do not interact. So that's only that one. Next slide we see when we have the interactions. So leaf area index, transpiration, evapotranspiration, precipitation, and soil moisture. So that's the changes that we see here. We have a higher carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, warming. Yeah, lower to mid latitude we would have like browning for vegetation because of global warming, and very high latitudes we would have Arctic amplification also, and we would have more vegetation growing in that region. You will see the impact, like if you look at the higher latitudes, we have higher vegetation, we have higher transpiration, we have higher evapotranspiration, and then we have higher precipitation because of the warming and that. And eventually, what we saw for soil moisture is decline in soil moisture. In the majority of the world, we have decline in soil moisture. It's very high decline. Very low soil moisture we would have like for higher latitudes. It's because of the Arctic amplifications that we can see here. So this is just when we have the radiative effect. We have only warming effect. But this one is we don't have any warming, no warming. We only have vegetation can interact with carbon dioxide and through CO2 fertilizations and physiological effects. So because of that, we have like higher vegetation all across the world with this effect. And then something is happening is physiological effect wins out majority of places. So we would have plants closest to, I mean, you don't have to open the stomata much, so they preserve water because of that, they reduce transpiration, lot of locations. And because of that, we will see kind of mix. It depends on the climate region, what's going to happen. But it means that because of vegetation and CO2 interactions, some locations soil moisture decreases, some locations soil moisture increases, and that actually depends on this process what's happening in there. But the total effect would be the combination of this slide and last slide. We have warming and we have vegetation. But that is the impact on flash rods when we have only the radiative compared to pre-industrial level. So yeah, this is again I mentioned those are idealized scenarios like quadrupling the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We look this way because we're going to see how much the changes are significant. Like, is it statistically significant or not? Like the color, all the colors here are means that we tested. This is statistically significant when we have like quadrupling the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It means that because of warming we have higher percentage of time in flash flood. We have more frequent flash flood. We would have more longer duration of flash flood. And like we had also before, we saw those locations like really low soil moisture. Those locations co-located with these regions. So it's like 20% increase in percentage of time in flash flood when we have warming. So, but just because of vegetation, only vegetation, no greenhouse, nothing. Just because of vegetation, CO2 vegetation interactions, that's the thing that we can see. Some locations, especially in water-limited regions, like in West Asia, in Middle East, and part of also Syria, also especially in western part of the United States, it looks like the CO2 fertilization effect wins out, and that means that this can add it up to the greenhouse effect. So that's the part that would add it up to that and can worsen the flash flood in those locations. But some locations opposite happens. So the takeaway is that yes, CO2 and vegetation interactions can modify flash rods. It's CO2 and stomatal conduction effects, so which is physiological effects, have opposite impacts, and also CO2 can amplify or contract the vegetation effect can amplify the radiative effect or contract depending on the location. So that was chapter 1 for that effect. For chapter 2, as I mentioned, that is focusing mostly on vegetation phenology changes. Because of warming, we have earlier spring leaf out, as we saw in observations in models. So dormant will leaf out, and we would have earlier like kind of shift. So for instance, today would be something like April. So in March would be something like that. So, and what's the impact on wildfires or climate extremes? So that's the research question. What's the influence of changing vegetation phenology on high impact climate phenomena? And the hypothesis is if you have earlier leaf outs, advanced leaf outs, with that we would have changes in soil moisture, evapotranspiration, changes on precipitation, we would have changes in soil moisture. So that's, for instance, this is the spring here, you can see higher transpiration, more precipitation here. And then see summer, that's the question, what's going to happen for latent, for transpiration, transpiration. What's happening shows the legacy effect, and what's happening in the spring can have impact in summer. Most likely in summer we would have some changes in soil moisture, and mostly would be reductions. The hypothesis that would be more drought during summer. Yeah, so I mentioned, so it would be reduction in soil moisture, and that can increase the likelihood of heat waves and drought. But the impact is not like only local. This is climate model, so it's like the atmospheric circulation exists. So if anything happened one location, like in Europe, it would be more vegetation, transpiration, precipitation, or something that can, because it's moisture, and can transport to Siberia, can transport to China, in other locations, and that have some kind of remote effects on other parts of the world also, and vice versa. It's just something happening. And again, we use CSM model, some idealized scenarios. This is what I'm going to focus today. It's just one month shift in satellite phonology. I'm going to show you how it's going to happen. Just today is like April, for instance, how it's going to be for climate extremes. But this costs a lot. For these simulations, can take a couple of months using supercomputer like 500 12 HPC processors. It takes 2 days to run just 1.5 years of the model. If you're going to do it with your laptop, just if you're going to run the simulation, our laptop can take a couple of months to do 1 year simulation even. I'm going to do like for 30, 40 years and multiple simulations, so that would be a lot. But I'm using the supercomputer from NCAR in Colorado, so thanks to that. Yeah, that's the experiment that just shifted. I haven't changed the fall because that was not much clear what's going to happen for fall. But this is just idealized scenario. If we have 1 month shift in this area like this, which is the vegetation greening. So if we started earlier, so something like that, what's going to happen for climate extremes? This is just preliminary results. So this is changes in the data. We did this on the higher latitudes, and then in lower, like in northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. That's the changes that we have. Like if we have greening, and then I look at the vegetation transpiration in the models. So it means that there would be more transpiration because of those greening during the spring. But later in summer, later on, you can see that there is reduction in transpiration. Means that it would be implication for soil moisture. It's most likely during summer would be reduction in soil moisture because of the phenology change. And that's the thing that we can see here. It's kind of distributed across the year. A lot of things can happen here as we are in the beginning of process. I will try multiple times to make sure that it's not related to climate variabilities. But yeah. And the next step is, because I'm gonna look at like not only mean conditions, what's gonna happen for extreme conditions. So with changes in phenology changes and for heat waves, droughts, precipitations, and also I like to use this one water tracking inside the model, and I can use that, and I can understand what's the source of the precipitations coming from, and this way I can understand how is the larger scale impacts of if there will be any changes in vegetation, like in Africa, what's going to happen for America or Asia. So yeah, going back to this, the very first slide, the chapter 1, chapter 2, I talk about that. Chapter 3, a lot left to do. I will focus on especially with increasing fire weather That's the season, always can happen every season. Yeah, thank you so for your attention. Any questions?
We still have time for questions.
Okay, yeah, let's go.